Yo, welcome to the stream. Just one moment while we make sure everything's going. Yo, welcome to the stream. Alright. So, this is a fun one. I was going to do it yesterday. This is an extremely depressing topic, but it's like it's something that everyone can use against me, and so people can see I'm in a position of weakness, and so they're going to come in with their stupid opinions, do their defamation, their trolling. This whole thing is defamation to begin with. This is the complaint. So, during the beginning of pandemic is when this all went down. This is Santa Clara Superior Court, case number 20CH009180. And I haven't even had a chance to read it yet. So the thumbnail of this stream is just a picture of roughly a timeline, and the theme of a lot of the tools that I've been making is, you know, the homeless data project streams that I've done, substantiating, you know, a story with data, basically, rather than telling a story with words. Can we use data to show a story? And these are tools that I wish I would have had when this thing came out. This isn't really supposed to be about me. It's supposed to just be about general what happens when you need to get a job and you have a history of violence. Because there's so many accusations of, oh, I won't help myself, oh, I must be mentally ill, oh, you chose to be homeless, oh, you won't lower yourself to get ahead, oh, I want prestigious jobs, you can get a job any day, blah, blah, blah. All false. I mean, what was I doing for these years, and where were my critics, you know, that allegedly offered me so much help during these times? So, like, the first critic came, you know, around here, 2021, early, after I had spent a year on the street in my car, and that was after my last job that I left, which I got as this hearing was happening. Like, I just barely squeaked into that job before as this case was hitting, and I think I was served with that actually in November, and the first hearing was supposed to be 2 weeks out. But I said, you know, I'm not going to be able to do this in time, so they gave me more time, and then pandemic hit. But I actually, you know, I had a response from the second iteration, which I defeated. And yeah, so people, another thing too that I didn't mention here is just people pretend that this doesn't exist and is a figment of my imagination and that I'm being dramatic, but obviously this exists and costs like $175 to print. So the people who served me with this have also gone to at least one, probably more, of these workplaces and interacted with the administration, because when you have a history of violence, it's, you know, their moral upstanding duty to notify people in case I dishonestly didn't notify them, you know. So it's sort of like I'm being policed by the people who served me with this. So if I walk into a retail job, ask to speak with the hiring manager, get that job, that means the private investigator who, you know, this is the third version, so who knows how long they were following me before they actually served it. the weird messages, weird behavior online that I got, etc. You know, who knows? Who knows the history of this? I don't have time for this. I've been busy working. So, right, this isn't supposed to be about me, but the reason it sort of is, as we'll get into in the research, which, you know, I'm just going to find existing sources and react to them like a response video or something, you know. So, get this out of the way. I know I've got a janky live stream set up, but it works. So yes, workplace violence is different than domestic violence, but in some ways it's actually worse, because workplace violence shows that, you know, you're willing to take it into the commerce space as opposed to keeping it behind closed doors where people are like, oh yeah, nobody cares when a man commits domestic violence, da-da-da-da, right? Am I wrong about that? Okay. So stereotypically, I'm a man, I can get away with domestic violence. But workplace violence, something completely different. There's insurance when you get hired by HR, right? So insurance probably has a different opinion between domestic violence and workplace violence. So if they know that you're likely to be violent in the workplace, what do you think happens to insurance, right? And we're talking about minimum wage jobs, right? Oh, well, you're a programmer, so just get a high-paying job where it'll be, you know, buffered in. So, okay, so I spend time learning a new programming language that's marketable when people criticize me for not going out and getting a minimum wage job at the same time. So, anyway, why does that matter? So these things are basically going to say, oh, you know, go through your support system. What support system, right? So let's just go top to bottom. Let's see what they all say. Hopefully this will be under a half an hour. Let's see where we're at now. Probably 5 or 10 minutes already, right? 7 minutes already. So we'll go quick. And, you know, as the description says, this is all a fabrication. This, I think, is to do with covering up misconduct of the employer, but it doesn't matter because it's on my record. So, effectively domestic violence. Also, if you type my name into Google, which is a rare name, it'll come up and say that I have a record of family violence, which is not true. Do I have time to go fix that stuff? No, I don't. So, well, we got time to do a stream. It's complicated. Oh, see, it says you can get a job. There you go. You're choosing to be homeless. So yeah, some professions like healthcare, childcare, obviously. Oh, law enforcement, police get jobs with domestic violence all the time. Oh. Can't expunge or seal a domestic violence. I don't know if that applies to workplace violence or not. So, a pardon is still another entry on your record. It's not an expungement. Expunging after a pardon might be an option. So, I have a civil, not a criminal. Good Lord, what lawyer is going to talk to somebody like me pro bono? So I've tried going through pro bono options, but it's just like, ironically didn't work around my work schedule, which is the main point of criticism that I've had. That was while I was still able to work, you know, in preventing this whole thing. But it just like escalated so much. And, you know, in part because the lawyers knew that I couldn't defend myself, so... So here's something that's interesting. My court case is 2 years old, but the issue with the employer stretches all the way back to 2016. So I've had several jobs since then. So basically everything since then is a trail of destruction. As far as now I have a court record, that's when I was accused of it. So like the perception is everything that I've done between here and here has been some kind of like fraud, dishonesty, lying to get my position. Basically there's something that DHH talks about called transitive guilt. This was November 24th, recent. So yeah, basically being called a racist or a white supremacist, or in this case, a bigot against women, violent, which can happen easier than you might think if you, say, dare venture an opinion on slice of contemporary corporate politics that intersect with a race in a way that isn't pre-approved by. So for me, it was at a work, celebration event. The employer bought drinks. I had 2 beers. I was actually being extra careful because I know how sensitive corporate can be. So definitely wasn't drunk. The next day the boss said, "Oh, I guess we were all too drunk to remember." I was like, "No way." And then I asked to speak with HR, and it turns out that's a big mistake. I still thought HR was your friend and fair and balanced and all that. I thought big corporation, enough time and resources to devote to getting to the truth of an issue. Turns out there was already an investigation against me. I don't actually know what the allegation was, but I knew that there was 3 matching complaints against me, so it's a mobbing situation. And yeah, like again, this is not supposed to be about me, but see how it is, like every time I've gotten a job and I've been like, the first, so while I stayed in tech still, I was above the board about what happened. And it was always like, oh, well, you need to say something or we can't give you the job. And so, I did. And then here, I just sort of like didn't talk about anything that happened in tech and just, I went to a work center, did like whatever construction cleanup, like anything that was available, is like sort of no questions asked, just like do the job, get paid, and done. Sort of like gig without cell phones. So yeah, I mean, it took a couple years for my whole tech career to be dead, but I accepted that it was dead, and I did whatever jobs I could do. And effectively, people just stopped responding to my emails. Like I told them what happened, and I obviously, like, they didn't tell me why I was fired. People who stopped responding to my emails obviously didn't say anything why they stopped responding. But I had a good career before that, so, transitive guilt is what my intuition tells me was going on. They just, plus it's just like kind of dramatic too, and healthy people don't deal in drama, and I didn't deal in drama. I just like moved on, kept to myself, got jobs, but then it was like used against me by the boss, treated me like crap, so I quit, treated me like crap, so I quit, and then I just quit tech, because I'm like, okay, this is going to keep happening, so can't really go through personal connections, it's not really realistic. So yeah, professional and trade licensing, um, I don't require a professional license, but people are like, "Oh, go into the trades." Well, if I go into the trades, are the trades going to let me in with domestic violence or workplace violence, even worse? So tap into your social networks. I mean, non-existent. And there's one person who, claims that they offered me the world, a place to stay and all this stuff, but I didn't have the balls to get back to him. But, as I said in the last stream, the reality is my phone service was not paid. He gave me one text, no phone calls, and then ambushed me on social media when I finally got a hotel. So, it's sort of like, I'm glad I didn't take a job in that network, because that is just not acceptable behavior. So, that person's going to be claiming this and that, and I'm sure, that's all I have to say about that. So what I've done to change my behavior, I've done nothing to change my behavior because I didn't do anything wrong. And with an attitude like that, yeah, you deserve to blah, 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 right? I get it. So I don't even care if people criticize me in that way. But that's what I would be saying to an employer. And the thing is, my brand is not... I've never had to, I've never had to BS to get anything. So I'm not going to start BSing, because then, yes, most people BS and they're also miserable and hate their lives. They may not admit that, but it just manifests in their behavior. They know that they've effectively sold their soul. So selling your soul means going against the good, going against the beautiful, going against the true. God is basically truth. And so if I give non-truths, which includes omission, which, yes, when I left tech, I started omitting things, that is getting away from God and selling your soul. So, not willing to do that, because, already people can say, aha, you got your job by... Most people will say that they've got this or that degree when they lie on their resume. Leaving stuff off is also lying on your resume. Did you know that? Why? So that they don't find out about something? So there is one morally defensible case where you can leave stuff off of your resume, and that is where, you're experiencing stalking or something like that. And in my case, it is private investigators in the reference check who represent entities in the reference check process who I believed were stalking me, and who did turn out to in fact be stalking me before they served me with this thing. So, I'm a very sensitive person. I'm vegan. Doesn't mean that I'm compassionate against animals. I would eat eggs and milk if it were from a compassionate source. It's just like, what I mean by sensitive is sensitive to vibration. Why does being vegan matter? Because you're not ingesting heavy elements that dampen vibration when it gets to you, and so you're more sensitive to things around you. So, yes, I'm more sensitive. Oh, don't be too sensitive. Oh, you're acting like a woman. I don't care what my critics say. I mean, I know where I am in my spiritual quest, and there are places in life for monks, this and that. Why don't I do that? Well, I've got student loan debt that I would need to pay back first. I've got additional debt from this non-working period that I need to pay back now as well. So I can't just go join a monastery because I still have my debts to pay back. And then, go criticize me for going to university. I know I've heard that before, but then the one exception for criticism of people going to university is for a degree like computer science, which I got in state, which I got. There was a 13 credit policy. I was taking 1821 credits, so I paid way less than I would have had to pay normally. So I'm without reproach as far as my university goes. Not only that, I was not pressured out of high school. I dropped out of high school, and then I went later after I was already in my field for a while, after I did community college for a while. I knew it was the path I wanted to take, so I did it. You know, it's like I'm sitting here, yeah, making it about me, even though it's supposed to be about this domestic violence and finding a job. But the thing is, you know, the biggest thing is tap your social networks. Be prepared to explain how you've changed. If you need to train for another career, I mean, that still goes with that. And so yeah, one pro on the side of the employers would be that, okay, maybe if they hire a criminal, then they can claim a tax benefit. So I'm not exactly criminal, I'm civil. And, you know, I've joked before on Twitter that, you know, if I were a felon, then I would actually have more rights, because in California, you know, felons are a protected class, like LGBT, you know, and, you know, it's just those 4 letters in my day. So whatever letters have been added. Oh my gosh, you're also this and that phobe, you know, or, you know, so there's protected class for, you know, sexual orientation, I think religion, and, you know, felony status. I don't know if it's just nonviolent felony status, but, you know, I'm accused of workplace violence. So I'm not even a felon with felony, you know, felon protections. I'm not domestic violence, which may be like, okay, you can keep it at home. At least it's only your wife. It's not messing with our bottom line necessarily. It's workplace violence. So sounds like you're doing a lot of speculation there. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. But, you know, again, what is insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. You know, why didn't tech work out? Why didn't service and labor work out? You know, part of it is pandemic, and I know people are tired of hearing that excuse too. Pandemic's over, but like, well, we're still in a state of emergency. We're still talking about mask mandates coming back. You know, so is it really over, or do we just, you know, is it over? You know, it's not over when you want to complain about it, but it's over when you want me to take responsibility for it. You know, so. Everyone makes mistakes, but some mistakes can carry a bigger penalty than others. In case of domestic violence, you could wind up with a criminal record that will affect your chances of getting a job. Many employers ask specific questions about your past and conduct criminal background checks to determine if a potential employee is a risk for theft, fraud, or workplace violence. Oh, workplace violence. Not many places even acknowledge that it's a thing, so I just, you know, workplace violence, violent felon is more like in line with what I'm up against. So, you know, there's the whole transitive guilt. Like, once people find out, they want nothing to do with it. And if it's a smaller employer and they find out, you know, when they, before, the thing that I actually got most upset about with my former employer was the reference checks, which, you know, that was before, you know, why did it take so long for them to take me to court, right? Like, I was so-called fired here, and court was all the way here like 4 years later. So here, you know, I just told my employers why I was fired, told them why I was fired. Actually, this one didn't ask, but, you know, they go back to the reference check, they call your previous employers, especially you're getting paid so much. And then they find out something, well, you're the whole dev team, basically, and so now you become something called a scapegoat. They just kind of, you know, pin their problems on you, treat you like crap, you know, for so-called force you to quit. I'm doing air quotation marks. You know, force you to quit. You know, not everyone's been through that, but if you have, you know what that is. It's basically narcissistic abuse, scapegoating. So yeah, so like, come here, now I started actually, like, okay, I'm quitting tech, screw it, and so I started tweeting at them. I kept tagging my boss and saying, like, meet with me, and, you know, I privately told them through email a couple times too, like, can we please resolve this? You know, I'm going to start talking about this publicly if we can't. and I started talking about it publicly. And you know, the first case was like here, and then one in December, and then the second one right after that, like January or something. I was served again after I had won them. But like on the one that I was first served with, it showed a prior case number that I haven't even read, so I think they didn't serve me that one. So like they could have started, you know, this whole process and filing complaints like all the way back to 2019. But that's still like several years later. So anyway, so it kind of like stopped for a while and came back, and like it would come back when I was trapped and isolated in my car and just like stressed out and anxious, and I'm like, you know, F these guys. I was still swearing back then. So yeah, you know, partially in defiance. I've never really been a big swearer, but just in defiance, kind of, you know. So let's see, anything new we can learn here. So yeah, I'm sitting here defending myself, and I'm just supposed to be like, you know, charged is not convicted. Indeed, indeed. So this is assuming that you've got a professional HR person who acts professionally. So for me, in my case, I had an HR person who was like, you know, I don't know if it came back on my background check or not, but, you know, it was like she, and, you know, like this without mentioning any names or anything, but like, you know, so I didn't have my ID at the time, and it was during pandemic when like the DMV was really hard to get to, and it's hard for me to get around and blah blah blah. You know, you have to do your I-9 identity verification, and I didn't have my ID at the time, and so I found out that I could use a school ID, but they're like, oh, if you don't have your driver's license, I'm gonna have to fire, you know, we're gonna have to let you go. Like screamed it down a hallway to me, like in front of another coworker too. And it's just like, come on, man, like I don't want this kind of drama or gossip. Like you could be, you know, and I had the solution. I actually had the ID in my pocket, but that just kind of like put me into like, you know, a fight or flight kind of response. And I just like, you know, memory froze, and I forgot that I even had it in my wallet, my student ID. So anyway, so yes, while it's not sufficient to deny me a job, they can make it difficult if they don't like me. I think anyone who's worked like a retail job has had those sorts of situations where it's like they force you out because they don't like you, you know? And I can ignore it for as long as possible, but sometimes it's just intolerable and you have to leave. And so that's what I've done with every subsequent job since the one that I got fired at. I haven't been fired again, but I've quit over and over and over again, and that's also not a good sign for when you're getting another job. Like, oh, well, why did you keep on quitting? So then what do I say? Do I make stuff up? No, not really. It's just like, it's getting to the point of repeating myself is insanity. And like, you know, plus I'm like 22-year experienced software developer. I've owned an agency before. I've worked for agencies. I've been a freelancer, you know, like, so friends and family, why don't they support that endeavor? You know, I think it's more fun to finally be in a better position than me, you know. People have warned me about envy in the past before. So, yeah, I said I'd try to keep it about a half an hour, so depending on how the question is worded, you might not need to report your history. I mean, yeah. So another thing too is every job costs money to apply. So like now, yes, I have money to eat, but that's not always been the case. Like a lot of times I've just been stuck in my car. The gym shower is closed, so it's like even if I had resources to go to an interview, I didn't, you know, as far as money goes, I didn't have like shower access. So, you know, I could wash myself with a sponge bath, and I did that, you know. Like the whole year of 2020 and into 2021, literally over a year without a shower. Because the gyms were closed that whole time. Honesty is best, it is. It is best. That's my whole thing. So, like, I've got to explain the charge, I've got to explain the reactive abuse that I had on Twitter to the charge, you know. I've got to explain why I left all these jobs. You know, it's just like I'm obviously don't have social skills, this or that, you know. Which, you know, it's not true. It's like, but the thing is, like, when we're talking about minimum wage jobs, it's just like, next, like, plenty of people willing to take this position. So, case pending. I haven't even been into case pending stuff before, so yeah, like, who knows how much of 2019 I had a case pending before they served me. Oh, that's another thing too. So yeah, in like 2013 was another situation where a few blocks from my parents' house, I actually got a refusal test, or a refusal to take an alcohol test on the side of the road. So that time I had 3 drinks, and it was too cold to take a field sobriety test. And I had medication that stays in your system for a long time, licensed, everything prescribed. But I was trying to find that in a book of lawyers, and the police decided that, okay, it's been too long, so you're gonna sign this thing, or you're gonna be considered refused. And I didn't technically refuse, but they decided that enough time went by that I had implicitly refused, even though I hadn't even gone through the whole book of lawyers that they gave me. So whatever, like, that's just another thing, you know, within the past, you know, N years. So it's like, I've got that actual charge, which, yeah, I take full responsibility for. I shouldn't have had 3 drinks before I drove home. And there, again, in my defense, I had a breathalyzer in my glove box. I actually waited in the cold parking lot for the battery to warm up, took the breathalyzer, and then it said that I was fine, so I left. But then in California, we've got this thing called no cop, no stop. So it was like 2:33 in the morning. There was a left turn, red arrow. I was like, forget this, and just went through it. And then a cop started pursuing me. And then, you know, again, this is the first time in a few years I drove in the snow. So it's just like I was pulling the e-brake to go around the corner, and then I saw the lights, distracted me, crashed into a snowbank. So I don't even have to necessarily tell this part of the story, but it's just like, you know. So it seems like I've got a bunch of paper cuts on there. So, you know, it's like, why would somebody risk it for me at such a low level, and then to get a higher level job where they might risk it for me? You know, I need more resources to be able to get that kind of job. Well, looks like you're doing a live stream now, so it seems like you got the resources now. Yes, indeed. But how do you think my tech skills were after all this time on the street and working service and labor jobs, effectively having quit tech? So, you know, this is definitely turned into about me. Pardon that. So, but, you know, I think it's kind of characteristic. Like, I've had a very clean life. I've had not many problems. But you can see how even a couple problems stack up, because it's like, you know, between the transitive guilt, you know, of being accused of something like violence, because of, you know, being accused of something that is effectively DUI, you know, refusal, they basically imply that you're guilty. Even though my case, you know, it could have been borderline. I would have been better off to just take the test, but because it was a blood test, not a breathalyzer test, and I was scared of what might be in the blood test, And also, I just generally don't consent to blood tests, even though I've taken them for STD tests, because sometimes you think with your other, your other head. And, at that time too, I drove 900 miles that day from Denver to my city of origin. So like my eyes were all red. I was like super tired. I was just trying to meet up with my friends and have some drinks at that bar because it had been a long time. And, I was listening to the 48 Laws of Power. So I was like also just being a total dick to the cop, like asserting myself and, this and that, when I should have just been more, like there have been, whenever I get pulled over otherwise, like it's usually fine. Like, I'm not going to say what I've done, but I've been pulled over and it's been fine. Like they haven't taken my car away or anything. And, California cops, a lot more cool. And it's clear that I lived in the car as well, so don't want to create another homeless person by taking my car away. So I'm sitting here on this stream. I could be applying to jobs right now. So volunteering is something that I don't know why I haven't done that more. I guess it's like here, I constantly feel like I'm going to leave because, ironically, I'm actually staying with a relative who is committing actual domestic violence against me. And domestic violence isn't just hitting, it's mental too. So it's like I'm constantly feeling like I'm in a state of like, I've tried to leave several times. Actually, one time, another thing too is just straight up, the house is bugged in some way. Like, I don't know who's listening on the other end. Oh, it sounds like you're just being like, I hate even talking about this stuff. Like that fact is sort of like, like a baby elephant is tied to a stake, and it learns, every time it tries to leave, it gets, its leg gets pulled by the string, and then it grows into an adult. You cut the string, but then it's so used to being around the pole that it never tries to step away. So it's just like, straight up, I know when I do streams like this, my relative comes home angry. But, now that I've said that, it's probably going to be a different pattern. It's like, find different ways to punish me for speaking on the internet about it. But yeah, like, the first time I tried to leave, actually, because I was going to contest this, the first time I tried to leave, actually was the only day he came home early for lunch, and some other strange guy came to the house. And it was like, he asked me about what I was doing as I was packing up to leave. So it's like, the only time someone came to the house, the only time the relative came home early. I mean, that's just one of the several reasons that I know that I'm being monitored here. So, like, I'm just constantly in this, like, sense of, like, flight. Like, I need to get out of here as soon as I can. So, like, don't you think if I could get a job that I knew I could keep, I would do it? If I'm living, it just sounds like you're making a bunch of BS. It sounds like, fantastical, da-da-da, right? So yeah, why don't I just volunteer? So it's just like the reason I don't schedule streams, the reason I don't schedule anything a day in advance is because I don't know. Like, he's also threatened to kick me out several times over pointing out mold, over setting up a Trello board so that we could keep track of chores. But then he wants to call me all these names, and it's like, I'm trying to set up an organization system here, so it's like, anything I try to do that's helpful, it's knocked down. I'm called all these names unfairly. I'm physically threatened. I'm mentally threatened with, what amounts to further defamation that compounds on top of, it's sort of like, 2 points make a line. So I've got this case of workplace violence, and so accusing me of any other kind of violence is going to be super easy. So why not provoke me to that and get a nice, easy victim points from the relatives? Like, I'm already not, I'm not being invited to any family functions, and like, I don't care. Like, if they're gonna fall for it, then You know, like I hear them, you know, ask about me to the relative that I'm staying with, and he'll just say stuff like, I don't know what his deal is. Like, not that I'm like sitting there listening, it's just like, you know, 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock at night when he gets home from the bar, and then he's on the phone and I can't help but hear it through the wall, you know. I actually put the blanket over my ear so that I can't hear it, because I just don't want to hear whatever BS he's spouting, because it's like, you know, like the vegan thing, like the energy goes into me, and then it's like, you know, call me a name, and it actually goes inside of me, and like I don't talk to many people, so it's like you're the average of the 5 people around you. So I'm around like one relative who is, you know, not helping the other relatives like me, telling me that I'm whining, telling me, you know, calling me names, threatening me, all this stuff. So that's one person. And then it's like the baristas and the librarians. Like, that's the only places I go. And they're just like, they can tell that there's something wrong with me. You know, I've probably got that beat down look in my face, and they just don't want to deal with me. So it's like, those are my 5 people, okay? So why don't I volunteer? That's a great idea. I've thought about it. I want to do it. I've got a history of volunteering. But setting down, well, I'm going to volunteer on Sunday. It's like, well, will I be kicked out on Sunday? Well, just be optimistic. It's so easy for someone to say who's not in a situation where they really don't have the option to go anywhere, where they're being threatened, you know. It's sort of like there's the battered spouse defense, which, like, you know, like a rich spouse can choose to leave, but a financially dependent spouse really can't, and so she can get away with, you know, killing her partner out of self-defense, basically, because just the torture got so bad. And yeah, I mean, I wondered why my brother acted like he did. Like, I would try to encourage him and stuff. Like, he's now passed away, as is my mom, both suspiciously, you know. So it's sort of like, now I know what they were probably going through. You know, I was making good money when I was a teenager, so I was able to get out of it and never be in the situation where I could have coercive control applied to me. So yeah, I mean, volunteering sounds great. You know, it's like, yeah, just do that. Okay. But you really, if you haven't been in this kind of situation before, you know, just, it's not like a man up thing. It's like literally like such intense chronic stress that it's like you really get like a form of amnesia. Like, this is really the kind of situation that induces, you know, it's like, thankfully I've been in a good position most of my life, and so, you know, hence the point of like building these data tools. It's almost just as much to remind myself that I'm not the piece of crap that everyone's treating me like these days, you know. So things an employer looks for, like, and I know, like, objectively, like, I would stay the hell away from, I would, you know, pardon the language, I would stay the heck away from me if I were an employer. Like, straight up. Like, I'm not going to start being a liar just so that I can look good. But then truth tellers are basically not welcome really anywhere. So, oh, it sounds like you're imposing all these limitations on yourself. You know, I don't know, if you won't help yourself, then it's, you know, it's obvious why everyone's abandoned you. You know, you won't help yourself, and so this has been stage by stage by stage by stage. If in 2018 someone said, yes bro, I got your back, nobody did. I've had a friend who sponsored me on Patreon, and like, thank you so much for that. Friend who's sponsored me on Patreon for so long. A couple more friends have jumped in. You know, we've got that one friend who all the way in 2021 says that he offered me the world, but all he gave me was one text message, which I didn't get because the phone was shut down. So if that's all he's gonna do to try, you know, thanks but no thanks, you know. Like, oh, you're choosing it. So, yeah, I know I've gone over a half an hour by this point. So, all my whining, but it's just, like, I'm probably one of the better off people in this situation. And, it looks like I could just get a job anytime. But, it's like, it's the details that matter. Like, make a broad stroke, a broad statement, and say, yeah, I could get a job today, I'm qualified, this and that. But it's the details of the process, and it's like, okay, minus 1/3 here, we're down at 60%. Minus 1/3 here, we're down at 40%. Minus 1/3 here, we're down at, way too low. Where it's like other candidates might be, minus 5%, minus 5%. Okay, this guy's, 80%. So we're looking at 40% versus 80% for the next worst candidate. So it's, I've been on the hiring side before too. I know that there's a scoring system, and if you've got a couple people up against each other, I'm going to have an extremely low score as far as overall. I could perform the best, but then I've got all these little situations that stack up against me. It's like, whoop, that's your fault, buddy. Don't know what to tell you. Well, and then all I can say is if that's your response, then you have no right to have any kind of prejudice against a homeless person, because that's the situation that like every single homeless person is in. 76% of them are sober. Most of them you don't actually see, just like you can't see me hiding behind that window. There's the visible homeless, which are the drug addicts out on the street, and then there's the invisible homeless who stay as below the radar as possible. They sleep in their car, they sleep on couches. Like, oh, it seems like you're in a basement. You can still be homeless even if you're staying with a relative, because there's no lease that protects me. Like, I constantly have the threat of being kicked out. So it's like I don't have the peace to plan something a week in the future. So I'm really not homed. I have no sort of protection. In Minnesota, in some states, there's the vulnerable adult situation, which is where you have a physical or mental infirmity. I would say there's also, since I'm experiencing political violence, there's, mental violence, physical violence, political violence. So I'd add political infirmity onto there. I'd say that's a lot like a physical infirmity. It's sort of like having a broken leg, more so than a mental disease. Well, it sounds like you're real good at rationalizing stuff. You sound mentally ill to me. I don't know. Like, yeah, at some point it can turn into mental illness, that's for sure. So, high level of responsibility, moral, ethical judgment. Well, see, I do have moral and ethical judgment and responsibility. Like, obviously it seems like I don't now, but education, you're expected to be a good example. Like, personally, I'm a great example. I'm a great example of how to be a moral and just person, but I'm not a great example of how to, bend the rules and play the system and succeed in a worldly sense. So, yeah, I've lost my Second Amendment rights. So, one of my buddies, I would have thought he'd come to my side to help me in court for that simple reason, being a big gun fanatic. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word on YouTube, but I have had problems with YouTube, but not, I think, in the way others have. I've talked about it in the past. So yeah, obviously, I'm not looking to, well, I mean, I can't say obviously, like, probably shouldn't say anything on this matter. But yeah, we'll just say that there's a lot of fabrication in here. The lawyers basically said what they needed to say to get it to stick, and I didn't show up to defend myself because I was busy, what? Getting a job? Huh. So yeah, I mean, I think the biggest issue is the reference, the personal network, the references. Like, you can't really go through your personal connections once you've got something like this. Like, reference checks. Like, especially if you've been successful before. In my case, probably a lot of envy comes out. So this probably applies more to professionals than to, like, people who are already established in the trades. But now establishing myself in the trades, you know, why did you quit the most lucrative career that everyone quits the trades for? You know, probably a flight risk. As soon as I get my feet on the ground, I'm going to run back. That's definitely true because I do feel called to do this sort of software and data stuff. So, you know, why don't people support my becoming a freelancer, you know, starting a software vendor? Again, you know, why don't people support that? I think it's just like envy means they'd rather knock me down while they're ahead of me. So, sounds like you're doing a lot of speculating there, buddy. You know, I've been dealing with this for a long time. So, I can substantiate so much of what I say. It's just like I'm trying to keep this into a half-hour stream, and I even failed there. So, let's try to wrap it up here because we're already going on an hour. Fun times, fun times. So, yeah. Doesn't look like I was trying to find a solution in this stream. Indeed, indeed. So, I mean, like, volunteering feels like the most plausible thing that I can do right now. But because of the living situation, it's just, I need to get out of here. I need to get into a stable living situation where I'm not stuck in fight or flight all the time. And, like, no going to talk to a mental health professional is going to help my home situation. Like, it's just not. Like, you know, I respected my relative before I came here, but after coming here, I see why his wife and son were so messed up. Like, excuses, excuses. You know, it sounds like you're just trying to do this or that. Appearances, yes, we are a species that's, you know, here, this is actually a very important point, is humans are designed to judge books by the cover. And so if you look at the cover of my book, it's very, very, very messed up. And being able to walk into workplaces by foot is my much preferred option. Like, it's where I have the best chances, considering it just, the process happens and people don't, you know, it's like if you get an email from someone, you're more likely to look up who they are online versus you've got a million things going on. Someone walks into the restaurant and you don't necessarily look them up right away, you know. So walking into a place is my best bet. Now, walking into a place has gotten me followed by private investigators. And it's possibly also been fine until the background check has come back. Because generally they're optimistic and let you start before the background check comes back. You know, and it's just sort of like a contingency, like sort of like a probation period. So background check comes back bad, and you know what's going to happen. They're not going to want to deal with the risks, and they're probably not going to want to fire you with that reason. They're probably going to find a safe way to fire you, or just fire you for no reason at all, which is totally legal in at-will employment. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of self-imposed limitations, but it's also a lot of experience. So yeah, I mean, I could go through and substantiate so much of what I say with data, but I was trying to make it a short stream. So yeah, thanks for watching, and no doubt you're seething with anger and criticism and feel like I'm a total piece of crap who needs all this discipline and blah blah blah. That's fine. That's your right to think that. But you know, all I would say to the trolls who know me in person is frickin' try to talk to me in private before you ambush me in public. But that's not really the point, I don't think. So anyway, thanks for joining. See you next time. Bye.